Hello everyone, Dr. Fenerty especially. This is my revision of my resource packet presentation on my new material. And so the first slide we're going to look at, we're going to revisit the planning strategies for instruction that Spencer covered in the presentation. So what our group was looking at was 2 Common Core state standards focused on reading comprehension specifically. The first one being determining a theme, and then the second one being analyze how a text makes connections. And since we're focusing on reading and our curriculum is moving towards the Common Core, we took both of those straight out of the Common Core. And so who will be taught will be 25 8th graders, and the reading level will be predetermined by the Common Core. When you look at the Common Core, it'll be like completion at the end of 7th grade, so we will know that they will have this prerequisite knowledge to understand these concepts. Reading level is going to be important, and I mentioned that assessment that we talked about as a prereq. And then we're also going to focus on theme and central concepts, main ideas in a text. And then we'll also give a vocabulary pre-assessment at the beginning of the unit to make sure that all of these students are on the same page and they're not getting left behind when we get further on in the lesson. So my portion was positive behavior support, or PBS, and what I focused on was a combination of the good behavior game and the say-do correspondence that I will go into detail further on in the presentation. The article I looked at was reduction of disruptive behaviors using intervention based on the good behavior game and the say-do correspondence. This study was done in 2010 and was by Rosario Ruiz Olivares, Jose Pino, and Javier Veluze. Sorry if I butchered that. So what the study focused on was 20 6- and 7-year-old students. There was only one teacher, and it took place in Andalusia, Spain, which, beautiful country, I'm sure. And so, also as a prerequisite, all students showed normal level of intelligence and development, so there was no predetermined developmental disorders. And so the main topic was how this PBS was utilized in the classroom. And as I mentioned, there's 2 components. So for the good behavior game, we had a definition of on-task behavior and disruptive behavior. On-task behavior is defined as the student attending to work defined by the teacher and also sitting and not being disruptive. And disruptive behavior, obviously, is the opposite of that. And when they speak, it's not academically based or related to the lesson. So there was a lot of different materials involved in the good behavior game. One being the game integrity checklist, game rules, recording sheet, weekly chart, reinforcer preference sheet, and a timer. So the game integrity checklist was reviewed at the beginning of every game by the teacher, and that basically helped that everyone agreed that they understood the game rules, which obviously those were listed up in the classroom as well. Those are self-explanatory. You're going to behave in the proper way, and you're not going to disrupt your other students. The recording sheet, actually, there was 4 teams that were involved. So the recording sheet had each team's name for every day of the week, and then that's where the teacher kept tally marks. So if a group, let's say group blue, acted out they would get a tally mark under their team name, and these games happened every day of the week. And then the weekly chart, that obviously after every day, those would move over into the weekly chart because there was multiple reinforcements. The daily being a little less grand, and then the weekly ones trying to really reinforce that long-term good behavior were a little more extreme and a little more beneficial for these children. And then the reinforcer preference sheet was also listed in the classroom, and that involved 7 predetermined reinforcers, whether it be a piece of candy for the team doing well and meeting the criterion, or leaving class early. That was something agreed upon. And then the timer literally just kept track, and the length of the games lasted 40 minutes. And this was determined by the academic period time. So this was, for instance, if the math class is 40 minutes, that's the length of the game. So this game was criterion based. So the teacher, it ranged from 7 to 15 was the criterion, and the only one that knew that was the teacher. and she just put it in an envelope and placed it at the front of the classroom. The students weren't aware. They just knew that there was a secret number that they were supposed to be below. And so if a team, so say for instance, the criterion of the day was 9, any group that got below 9 tally marks was reinforced with a positive motivator that was listed on that reinforcer sheet. So the second part of this study was the say-do correspondence, and I really like this part of the study because what it was more of a meeting with the student and the teacher on a positive level. So say Johnny acted out, I would approach and be like, and we just have a little meeting. Johnny, how did you act? Can you please, what do you think would be a better choice? And he'd explain. And then, oh, can you please, I agree, can you please show me and do that next time? So you really have them verbalize and say what they did wrong and how to put it into action in the next class, excuse me. So the results of this study were very positive. The disruptive behavior decreased 22%, and then the on-task behavior increased 68%, and they also, that's why I showed a good little classroom over here in the corner, and this is really positive because you can really make this any length of time. For the younger students, you can really consolidate it. Maybe it's 15-minute carpet time that you reinforce this good behavior game. And say-do correspondence really helps them verbalize and start thinking about a better choice for them in any scenario. So in our classroom, this would work really well. As I mentioned, we have 8th graders, and we chose a grouping already. So the teams of 5 would already be in the groups. The daily, weekly checklist, because we'd meet every day, so then we could have those reinforcers and really carry it over. And then our game length would change because it'd be 50 minutes, because that's a typical middle school period. And then our reinforcers would be a little different because middle school students love to get out of class early. Who doesn't like candy? We also talked about doing an extra credit coupon, so if a team, we pass out those, so maybe they didn't do so well on a test, we could attach that and that could be their reinforcer and they could turn it in later if they needed. And then what we talked about is even those weekly carrying over, those weekly checklists and reinforcers, eventually a pizza party. Who doesn't like pizza? So the next part of my, my section was assessment. I really do like assessment. I think it's very important. It can really help improve you as a teacher and the classroom results. So I focused on self-assessment and how it impacts critical thinking and self-regulation. My article was the impact of self-assessment on self-regulation and critical thinking of EFL learners by this wonderful man in Iran, and I don't want to butcher his name. And it really focused on putting it on the students and having them think about their choices, kind of related to the say-do correspondence. So who was included was 40 EFL students, ranging from 18 to 23. So they were a little older, but it was based in a language school. So they were very proficient in English. And they are actually native Persian speakers. So this could really translate into some of our English, Spanish learners and really correlate to that, if exercised with fidelity. So how this was utilized, so what I looked into was the TOEFL, and that's how they determined eligibility for this study. So these native Persian speakers completed the TOEFL, and if they were within 1 standard deviation below or above, they were accepted into the study, and that just made sure they weren't at a disadvantage. That translated into a 20-person control and a 20-person experimental group. They were all given a self-regulation questionnaire, which had, pardon me one second, 63 questions on it. And that just assessed them on the Likert scale, 1 strongly disagree, 5 strongly agree. And that was, like I mentioned, 63 questions. And then they were also given, and that's going to relate to the self-regulation, and then they were given the California Critical Thinking Skills Test. And that associates, obviously, with the critical thinking element of the study. The part of the intervention that is really most important is the self-assessment checklist. And that was given to the 20-person experimental group. And all students were to compose 2 150-word compositions for 6 weeks. The only difference is the experimental group had a training on the self-assessment checklist and then got to use that after every composition. So they began to self-assess and really start thinking about their writing. And what they found was in critical thinking, the experimental group increased 6.7 points in critical thinking, while the control group only had an increase of 0.35. And that was assessed by that California Critical Thinking Skills Test as a pre and post test, so that was the difference, average increase in scores. And then for the self-regulation questionnaire, also used as a pre and post test, there was an increase by 9.7 points for the experimental group as compared to only 0.15 for the control group. So what they determined was there was a stronger connection between self-assessment and self-regulation. Even though there was a positive growth for critical thinking, it wasn't as extreme as the self-regulation. So by them using that self-assessment checklist after writing those short little stories, whatever the prompt was, it really helped increase other skills for the students. So how this will be used in our classroom, even though we do have those groups, we can still hand it out individually. And so this is really good since we're focused on reading composition as it relates to multiple texts, comprehension, in multiple texts. We can still, the prompts we use can relate to theme and main ideas, connections. And so even as an introductory little prompt, maybe a bell work, we're still getting those, utilizing those skills with fidelity, and they can assess where their weaknesses are, strengths are. And as a group, we even talked about, I'm sorry, it's not on the PowerPoint, we can have teacher meetings when they have a couple assessments and be like, Miss Urban, I'm struggling with this, can we maybe focus on this, can you maybe help me? And with them having those realizations, they can really start to grow as students. Also, by this critical thinking and self-regulation, it can really help have more powerful discussions. And because they're thinking about a text in a deeper way, how it connects with them, and really utilizing those really speaking to those Common Core state standards that our group was focusing on. Thank you very much.